Hi, I'm Suzie Boss. I'm an education writer and advocate for project-based learning. I live in Portland, Oregon, and have worked with teachers all around the world who are interested in taking their students in a new direction. So kind of let's start with a big tent here. And both of these are ways of teaching and learning that fall within what I like to think of as the big tent of inquiry. So these are ways of learning that are driven by good questions, questions that matter to students, that are interesting enough for them to really dig into, want to spend some time exploring, and then in learning some new content, some new skills, mastering some new skills, they're able to apply what they've understood and then do something with that understanding. So they create something, make something, come up with a solution, in some way take their learning and demonstrate what they know and can do. So let me kind of tease out some of the differences between project and problem-based learning, because these come up a lot, these questions. And I think the good thing to remember is they have more in common than they do differences. So to kind of go back a little bit in time, this whole the origins of this style of learning that we're seeing more and more today in schools, the kind of current incarnation of it goes back to medical schools in the 1950s or so, more than half a century ago, when smart medical students were coming through the pipeline and they didn't quite understand what to do with real life patients when they were presented with not book learning, but an actual person to diagnose and treat. And so in medical schools in Canada, initially, faculty designed some really interesting case study type problems. So these were the first kind of uses of problem-based learning in our modern learning, where interesting complex problems were designed by the faculty, and then these medical students had to diagnose and come up with a treatment plan. There was no single right solution. Just as you know, if you've gone to a couple different doctors, you might get different diagnosis and treatment plans. So there were perhaps multiple correct solutions. So that was kind of the start of bringing this approach into the classroom. Now, we all know that learning by doing goes back a long, long ways in our human history. But this version of it, where kind of it's a structured situation that you're bringing students in to wrestle with and then figure out and present their resolution to, that's kind of the origins of what we see in classrooms today. Now, as we've evolved over the decades since then, we continue to see problem-based learning in classrooms, and these continue to be interesting, complex problems, typically designed by teachers. Problem-based learning tends to have a fairly short timeline, maybe a week or so at the most, to wrestle with an interesting problem. You see this a lot in engineering, you see it in mathematics, economics, you see it in other contexts. But they tend to be short-term and designed pretty much by the teacher, perhaps reflecting an interest of the students, but more teacher designed and then handed off to the students to figure out and solve. And the audience typically is presenting that solution back to the classroom. Now, project-based learning takes a lot of that same origin story and expands it out a bit. So in project-based learning, you continue to lead with a question, but that interesting question might be negotiated between teacher and student. It might be based very much on student interests or a question that they've asked, and the teacher sees this is a way to really dig into some interesting content that we can explore together. So from the very beginning, there's a little more student voice and choice involved in planning the inquiry experience. And then throughout the project, it may extend longer than a problem that I described earlier. It may be more complex, perhaps more interdisciplinary. There may be often a need to extend outside the classroom for research or investigation. And then typically there's an authentic audience. So you're not just presenting your solution to the folks in the classroom who have been through this experience with you, but there's a broader audience. And that's part of the whole engagement piece of what makes project-based learning really grab hold of student interest, because they see that their work matters to someone in the world, that there's significance and importance, and that it's work worth doing. I think it starts with student engagement. If we don't have students who show up with curiosity and who want to be there in the learning experience, it's an uphill battle all the way. And beyond being an uphill battle, we know from research that we have a real engagement problem in schools today. The longer, according to the Gallup Hope surveys, the longer students spend in school, the less engaged they feel. It's just a downward graph, and it's kind of dispiriting if you're thinking about what sorts of adults are we trying to prepare for the world ahead. Don't we want curious people who feel like they can take hold of problems, figure out solutions, and manage their own learning? And I think that's what we need. So I think at heart, project-based learning and its close cousins, problem-based learning, and sort of other similar approaches that put inquiry right at the center and that do pay a lot of attention to student interests. These are opportunities to change that curve and to reignite students' curiosity that I think we all know everybody's born with. School teaches us sometimes not to ask questions that we wonder about because they might be the wrong questions. And I think in project-based learning, we get to reignite that curiosity. And for me, that's the most compelling reason. When I talk with students about what they like project-based learning, why it's worth doing, they talk about it matters to them, it interests them, it motivates them. And I often hear about examples of projects that extend after the grading period ends. So in other words, kids don't want to quit. They want to keep going. And I think that's the greatest indicator that, we've hit the sweet spot of really finding something that is compelling and motivating to students. So when we think about what motivates students, what makes them feel like the school experience matters to them, I think we have to just think about some of our basic human qualities. When do we feel responsible for our learning, and when are we just being compliant? I think there are some differences there, some really important differences that get right at the heart of motivation. In project-based learning, we often find that students who have been very good at school in a traditional definition of school, in other words, in teacher-led, textbook and test-based experiences, students who know how to play that game might be a little uncomfortable when they encounter a project-based learning experience, because all of a sudden they have to tap into that internal motivation and inquiry that perhaps they've kind of let go fallow for a little bit in being motivated by the grade or by what the teacher wants from them. They have to tune back into, what do I want as a learner? How do I learn? How do I learn best? How do I learn with other people? So that's interesting for them, I think. Sometimes it's very challenging for some of our kind of high flyers. Not that they can't succeed and don't succeed with project-based learning, but it can cause them to have to think in some new ways and perhaps work with other people in ways that they haven't needed to before. So that's one piece of it. I think getting all students ready for the world ahead that we know is going to involve a lot of collaboration, a lot of problem solving that's complex and might require people with some specialties to come together, bring their specialized knowledge together in some cohesive way. Those are pieces of it. And I think for students who have been sort of coasting along and not too interested, this is a chance to really change the game for them. One of the, I think, beautiful things about project-based learning is that it uses assessment in a way that some students just have never experienced before. And let me explain what I mean by that. A good project is just embedded with formative assessment throughout. So students are getting a lot of feedback. And not only are they getting a lot of feedback, they're getting time in the course of that project to go at something again, to do another draft, to apply what they've learned now in a new way. So it's not just take a test, find out you didn't do well, and you're over with that and assume you're not good at that. This is a whole different experience. And the assessment expert Rick Stiggins likes to talk about assessment that puts students on winning streaks as being the best kind of assessment. And I think we see that in project-based learning. For students who have felt perhaps disengaged or unmotivated because they just haven't been doing very well in traditional learning experiences. not trying very hard for whatever reason, or perhaps just struggling. Here's an opportunity for them to see that not only can they succeed, but they're getting that kind of assessment that helps them succeed. And they feel a partnership with teachers. I have many teachers tell me that they feel like they get to know their students much better through projects. So I think there are many answers to the motivation question, depending on who the kids are and what is it that it drives them internally, what gets them fired up about learning. But project-based learning, I think, is a really great context for lots of different kinds of learners to find that sweet spot and to get on those winning streaks.